remember, like Bob Clark and Doug Campbell, they actually devoted a show. What was it called? The Lives of Fletcher
Yeah, the
Pratt?
Lives of Fletcher Prouty. What a
Right.
joke.
Yeah.
What an embarrassment. I mean, those.
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Hello. What? I don't even think that's a word. Hello. Oh, God. Here we go. Feels like a Monday, folks. I was trying to say hello in Spanish. Anyway, what's up, everybody? It's your boy, the Triple B. Big Bad Bob here with you, otherwise known as Rob Clark. This is the Lone Gunman Podcast, and this is episode number 257. That's right, folks. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank everybody out there who has listened and supported this show for almost 10 years now. It's crazy to still be here doing this. It's crazy to still be finding new stuff to talk about. It's just crazy all around. It's crazy to be presenting at Lancer this year. It's crazy. The format of the show will be changing coming up. We're going to be trying something new and different. So yeah, exciting times all around. And if you haven't yet, make sure you head to YouTube and subscribe. We're going to be doing the show live at the end of November, starting at the end of November. And we'll see how it goes. I mean, that's all we can do, right? If you watched the YouTube short this week, you'd know what I'm going to talk about. But if you haven't, then you're just going to have to wait just a little bit longer until Bob brings you a word from our sponsor. That's right, the delicious Silk City hot sauce, baby. And look, every once in a while, they put these crazy deals together. So you check their website. You can get like 10 bottles of hot sauce for like $60. I mean, that's like maybe a month's supply for your boy who puts it on in everything. Because I don't like bland meat in my mouth. I just don't. Anyway, Bob, tell him about the silkest of the cities of the hottest of the sauces. Big Bad Bob here with you for Silk City hot sauces. Why Silk City? Because this hot sauce comes to you directly from Paterson, New Jersey, also known as Silk City. These hot sauces are 100% natural, gluten-free, vegan, contain no chemicals, fillers, dyes, or junk. Everything is packed into recyclable glass containers because glass doesn't leach weird flavors into the product. All other hot sauces are sourced in small batches from locally bought fresh peppers. It's all about the pepper, people. I'm telling you. Your boy, Big Bad Bob, loves his food like he loves his women. Hot and spicy, but not so hot you can't eat them. So, if you love yourself some sauce and you're tired of trying to transform your bland meat into something edible, with the tip of a jar, you will transform your life forever. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com. Place an order, and upon checkout, enter the code GUNMAN. That's GUNMAN for 20% off of your entire order. You won't regret it. Thank me later. Peace. Thank you, Bob. And once again, the code is GUNMAN, GUNMAN. I really need to update the jingle. That was back when I still had a doo-doo microphone, and it would soften up things at the beginning and end of sentences, which is very frustrating. And now I have this beautiful, crystal clear microphone that you can hear everything that I say in 4K quality. 8K if you have both AirPods in your ears. So I mentioned Lance already, and we're creeping into November here, folks. And if you haven't already, you better book the flights now. Okay. My buddy Joe Borelli is going to be in Dallas representing the Lone Gunman podcast, people. Doug Campbell is going to be there. Carmine Savastano is going to be there. Chuck Ocelli is going to be there. Larry Hancock is going to be there. A plethora of other awesome researchers and dudes and ladies in general are going to be there. So if you haven't yet, book your flight. If your flights are full and you can't get on a flight, you better get your ass to the Greyhound station and get you a bus. All right. Or if you have a lot of money and you really don't care how much you spend, I mean, hell, just Uber to Dallas from like Denver. Be like Sylvester Stallone. Just hand the guy a big wad of money and say, sit here and wait for you. You're my driver now, type of thing. So, all right, that's enough of that. Enough of the shenanigans. Let's get right down to business. All right. I came across a good bit of witness statements that I'd previously, I won't say never, I'll say don't remember seeing. I see a lot. And it's hard to remember everything, but certain things would stand out to me had I read them before. So a lot of these people that we're going to be talking about today, you might never have even heard of before. And I'm talking about eyewitness testimony. And we've talked at length on the show too before we get into some eyewitness testimony. I got one thing I did find. We always wondered how the police and the FBI knew so quickly after the assassination that Lee Oswald was staying at 1026 North Beckley at that rooming house. Now, according to Earlene Roberts, there was police and FBI there a half an hour after Oswald left. This would be before he was even arrested at the Texas Theater, folks. Before they even got him downtown. Before they even got him into an interrogation room. Before they even asked that question. If he even answered them truthfully. So, had the events gone down like that, you figure by the time they had arrested this man and got him down to the station and got him into an interrogation room, they would have to, of course, get their ducks in a row first. They're not going to jump in the room with this guy right away. They're going to make him sit there and wait. And they're going to come up with a game plan about how they're going to address this individual and try to get information from him. So, you're looking at 3:00 at the earliest, right? If the source of the information is coming directly from Oswald, they say different. They say they found out through Ruth Payne's address book in Irving, but that's a whole different story that we've gone into before. So I found a statement from one of the officers, W.E. Potts, officer number 576 of the Dallas Police Department. In his report, let's see. Yeah. His report about the events of November 22nd, 1963 for him. This is according to W.E. Potts, folks. On Friday, November 22nd, 1963, it was my day off. At 1 p.m., I heard on the radio that the president had been shot. I called our office and talked to Detective T.L. Baker, and he told me to get my ass in to work. No, he told me to report for duty. So I arrived at our office at the Homicide and Robbery Bureau at 2 p.m. After arriving at the office, I took an affidavit from Danny Garcia Arce, who was a white male, 18 years of age, and a Mr. Jack E. Doherty, who was a white male, age 40. At least that's what I think it says. I don't know. I could be wrong. But that's what it appears to be. Both of these men are employees of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. I was in the process of taking an affidavit from Doherty when the uniform officers brought in a white male they said had killed Officer J.D. Tippett. I later learned that the man the officers brought into our office was Lee Harvey Oswald. Mr. Doherty and Mr. Arce saw Oswald and told me that he was employed at the same place they were employed, the Texas Schoolbook Depository. It was about 2:40 p.m. when I finished taking affidavits from Doherty and Arce. Captain Fritz told Detective Billy Sinkle and myself to go to 1026 North Beckley and search the room of Lee Oswald. All right, so he just wrapped up taking statements from Doherty and Arce at 2:40 p.m. So he tidies things up, and then he says, Captain Fritz told Sinkle and myself to go to 1026 North Beckley and search the room of Lee Oswald. Lieutenant E.L. Cunningham went with Detective Sinkle and myself to this address. When we arrived at 1026 North Beckley, we contacted Mrs. Earlene Roberts, who's the landlady, and a Mrs. A.C. Johnson, who was the owner. This was at 3 p.m., November 22nd, 1963. We checked the registration book for Alex Heidel or Lee Harvey Oswald and could not find neither of the names in the book. The television was on, and they showed a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald, and Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Roberts recognized the man as one of their roomers and said that he had registered there as O.H. Lee. They then directed me to his room, which was a small room just off the living room. We found that Lee Harvey Oswald had rented the room October 14th, 1963, and used the name O.H. Lee. We waited until the Justice of the Peace, David Johnston, Detective Turner, Detective Moore, and Assistant DA Bill Alexander arrived with a search warrant. This was about 4:30 or 5 when the above-named men arrived at 1026 North Beckley. We then proceeded to search the room of Lee Harvey Oswald, or O.H. Lee. We recovered a City of Dallas map with several locations marked on it, a leather holster, a pair of binoculars, numerous letters addressed to Lee Harvey Oswald, several books and personal papers. We then brought all this property to room 317 at City Hall. On November 23rd, I reported to work at 10 a.m. and worked in the office answering telephone calls. I worked in the office until midnight. On November 25th, 1963, Detective Turner and myself took a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald to 4007 Flamingo Street in Mesquite, Texas, to the home of Ronald Fisher, white male, 24. Mr. Fisher's business address is the county auditor's office. He stated that the picture looked like the person he saw looking out of a window on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository a few minutes before the president's motorcade arrived at Elm in Houston. He would not definitely say it was the man he saw, but he stated that it looked like him. On November 23rd, 1963, at 2:15 p.m., Detective Cinco and I accompanied a show-up consisting of John Thurman Horn, David Knapp, Lee Harvey Oswald, and Daniel Lujan from the jail office to the show-up room. I stood on the stage during the show-up and could hear Detective Lavelle's voice, who was conducting the show-up. I could not see Lavelle through the black screen. After the show-up, Detective Cinco and I took the four above-mentioned persons to the jail office elevator and waited until they were safely on the elevator before leaving. And we'll get more into Ronald Fisher here as we go on. But so interesting how the quote-unquote official story goes down. That they didn't take anything out of Lee Harvey Oswald's room until 5 o'clock, which by some accounts is total horseshit. So let's move on to some eyewitness testimony, shall we? And here we go. Mrs. Tony Ruby Henderson furnished the following information on December 6, 1963. This is an FBI memorandum. On November 22nd at approximately 12:15 p.m., she was standing on the east side of Elm Street, just north of Houston, awaiting in passing of the presidential motorcade. She said shortly after she arrived at this location and just prior to the arrival of the motorcade, she recalls an ambulance arriving and departing the area to pick up an individual whom she understood had had an epileptic fit. Mrs. Henderson said after the ambulance departed the area, she heard a woman in the record building located on the southwest corner of Elm and Houston yell, "Yeah, Woodman!" which is a Dallas high school, and she looked in the direction from which the yell emanated. She said she thereafter swung around and looked in the building in which she works, the building located on the southeast corner of Elm and Houston, and thence around to the Texas School Book Depository building. She said she observed numerous people on various floors looking out of the windows of the Texas School Book Depository building. She recalls that she saw two men on one of the upper floors of the building. She said she recalls one of the men had on a white shirt and one had on a dark shirt. She said she only observed these men from the waist up and does not know what their other attire consisted of. She said these men were standing back from the window, and she got the impression they were working and yet looking out the window in anticipation of the motorcade passing the building. She said she saw these men before the motorcade reached Houston and Elm, but doesn't have any idea how long it was prior to the motorcade arriving at that location. She said she believes the person in the white shirt and dark hair was possibly a Mexican, but could have been a light-skinned Negro, as he appeared to be dark complexioned, if that makes any sense whatsoever. She said she couldn't describe the other person other than the fact that he was taller than the aforementioned individual. Mrs. Henderson said at the time the motorcade passed where she was standing, she heard what she initially thought was a firecracker and saw what she thought was paper fly out of the presidential car. She said she now realized it was a shot she had heard, and what she thought was paper was probably flesh. She said after the first shot, she believed she heard two more in rapid succession. And then, folks, a fourth shot. Mrs. Henderson said after the shooting, she stood transfixed in a daze for some time before returning to work. She said she returned to her place of employment at about 12:43 p.m. Mrs. Henderson said she became extremely upset and nervous after the president's assassination, and it was necessary for her to take the following Monday off her job. She said she hesitated to mention anything about her observations, but felt she should relate same as they might possibly be of some benefit. Mrs. Henderson reiterated she could not definitely state one of the men she saw in the window of the Texas School Book Depository was not a Negro. She said she does not know what floor of the building the men were on, but doesn't recall seeing anyone on a floor higher up than the one they were on. That's Mrs. Ruby Henderson, folks. Robert Edwards, an employee of the Dallas County Auditor's Office, Dallas County Records Building, Dallas, Texas, lots of Dallas there, advised as follows. This is on December 2nd, 1963, FBI memorandum, that he, along with other employees of the auditor's office, had been permitted to leave work early on the 22nd in order to eat lunch and view the presidential motorcade. He said he ate lunch around 11:30 and just before 12 went to the northeast corner of Main and Houston. There he met a fellow employee, Ronald Fisher, by prearrangement. That means that they had talked about meeting there before. They actually met there. Funny how that works. Shortly after he arrived there, he and Fisher went to the corner of Houston and Elm Streets for a better viewing position. It was at this time they were facing the Texas School Book Depository building. He arrived at this point about 2 or 3 minutes before the motorcade appeared. Just after arriving there, he saw a man on the 6th floor of the above-mentioned building who was apparently standing so he could be seen in the corner window. He described this person as a white man wearing a light-colored sports shirt, open at the neck, and having short, light, sandy hair. Short, light, sandy hair. Now, does that sound like Lee Oswald to you folks? Yeah, me either. He did not recognize this individual, and he mentioned to Fisher how unusual it was that this man would be up in the window, and he wondered what he was doing up there. He did not see a gun, and his attention was diverted from this man when the president drove by. Shortly after President Kennedy's car had passed his position, he heard shots, which he thought were 3 or 4. Again, here's the 4, in very rapid sequence. And because of the confusion, he did not look again for the individual he had previously seen in the window on the 6th floor. He had no idea to where the shots had come from, and the person he had seen in the window previous to the shooting was visible only from the lower neckline up, and he was apparently standing between boxes which could be seen from the street. Lee Harvey Oswald's photograph was exhibited to Edwards, and he could not be sure this was a photograph of the same person he had seen in the window as above. He did not know Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby by name, description, or photograph. Mr. Clemon Earl Johnson of Kleberg, Texas, was interviewed at 500 South Houston Street here in Dallas, Texas. And on March the 18th, 1964, he furnished the following information. And this is a FBI memorandum put together by Thomas Tredis and E.J. Robertson. Mr. Johnson stated that he was employed as a machinist for the Union Terminal Company at 500 South Houston Street there in Dallas, and was so employed on November the 22nd, 1963. On this date, he took up a position on the Elm Street Viaduct overlooking the route taken by the presidential motorcade on that date. Mr. Johnson stated his attention was attracted to the motorcycle escort and the automobile carrying the President Kennedy here as this section of the motorcade came into his view here. He stated he first realized something was wrong when the motorcycles began moving from their regular course, and at or just before this, he heard sounds that could have been shots. they could have been. Mr. Johnson stated that at the time he did not know that it was shots, and he could not say how many shots he heard. His attention remained on the vehicle carrying President Kennedy, and he observed this car until it sped away. Mr. Johnson stated that some white smoke, was observed near the pavilion there, but he felt that this smoke had come from an abandoned motorcycle near the spot by a Dallas policeman. Mr. Johnson stated that he did not know nobody named Lee Harvey Oswald, and he had never met or seen Jack Rubin neither. And that was Mr. Clemon Earl Johnson of Kleberg, Texas. All right. This is the Cecil Small allegation. Some of you have heard it, some of you haven't. So we're going to go over it again real quickly here. Now, this is from a FBI U.S. DOJ communication in 1967, a teletype. Small advised he was proceeding in the direction of downtown Dallas on Fort Worth Avenue and was approaching the intersection of Houston Street and Fort Worth Avenue when he observed Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy stand up in the automobile. At about this time, he saw a man running across the grass from the wall on Houston Street, and the man ran directly in front of Small's truck, requiring Small to apply his brakes. Also, two women at this time crossed in front of Small's truck, and the man and the two women all proceeded to a brown station wagon parked on Houston Street. The oldest of the women stumbled and fell shortly before she got to the station wagon. All three appeared to be Cuban or Mexican. The man was carrying a rifle wrapped in paper with a sign approximately 1½ feet square tied to the end of the rifle barrel. Small maintained he was positive that this was a rifle because he could see the scope attached to it. I wonder what the sign said. Hello, this is a rifle. It has a scope on it. We are Cuban. Have a great day. Small proceeded 10 or 15 blocks down Fort Worth Avenue to the Western Auto Store. It was at this time there was a news flash. The TV set in front of the store that the president had been shot. The store clerk informed Small where the shooting occurred, and Small concluded at this point that the man he saw who passed in front of his truck carrying the rifle must have been the assassin. Small then proceeded to another store and thereafter was directed to an auto parts store in Oak Cliff. He passed by the Texas Book Depository building on Elm Street, and approximately 1½ miles from the depository building, at a cloverleaf intersection, picked up a man walking, who he subsequently realized the next day, oh my God, it was Lee Harvey Oswald, folks. Lee Harvey Oswald. Small stated Oswald could not have assassinated the president because, in his opinion, he would not have had sufficient time to have assassinated the president and walked to the cloverleaf intersection where he was picked up by Small. Small carried this man to the Oak Cliff section and led him out on 10th Street, other street name unknown. Small stated after parking his truck, he walked back down the street, and while walking down the street carrying a connecting rod in his hand, a man yelled at him, which he believes to have been the same man that was on CBS's TV program June 27th last, R.E. The Warren Report, and was operator of a used car lot, who testified he observed Oswald walking down the street with a pistol in his hand and yelled at Oswald. Small thereafter proceeded to Irving to pick up his wife, who was employed at the Maywood Manufacturing Company. He observed a large crowd of people and building and when he reached the crowd, he was at Parkland Hospital. He saw standing in the crowd the man and two women who appeared to be Cuban or Mexican, who had previously crossed in front of his truck while he was on Fort Worth Avenue. He asked the older woman, who had a bruised leg now, if she had hurt herself when she fell over town. The older woman turned and said something in a foreign language to the young girl, who in turn spoke to the Cuban woman. They thereafter departed from the crowd. It was about this time Small observed President Kennedy's body being removed in a casket. When asked why he did not tell someone about the Cuban man and two women, if he believed they were responsible for the assassination, particularly when he again observed them at Parkland Hospital, he replied, "I guess I was in a daze." He was in something, and probably on something. What we call here in Virginia, good shit. Yeah. He stated he had not previously divulged this information to anyone because while in Dallas, he was afraid to furnish any info, and he does not now desire to receive any publicity or become involved. However, he is of the opinion that Oswald did not kill Kennedy, but that the man who ran in front of his truck was the assassin. The questioning of Small and his wife revealed that Small has suffered seizures all his life and that he has had several severe, quote, seizures the past several years and is extremely nervous individual. It was obvious to interviewing agents that Small, on occasion, became extremely nervous. They stated Small is being treated by Dr. Wilson in Boone, North Carolina, and that he has been examined by a doctor in Asheville, North Carolina. He has attempted to obtain disability benefits from Social Security, but was denied on July 66. They both advised Small unable to work because of these, quote, seizures, in which he loses consciousness, and when he regains consciousness, acts like a drunk man, in that he is unable to recall things. Small admitted he has read all the newspapers which he still possesses of the events concerning the assassination and watched the CBS report 4 nights. Small admitted on numerous occasions he is unable to sleep for thinking of the events in Dallas and merely sits in the trailer and smokes cigarettes, jacks off, and drinks coffee. Which one did I add there? You'll never know. Mrs. Small advised she wrote letters to Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy January last, informing Mrs. Kennedy she and her husband were in Dallas when the president was shot, and Mr. Small was going in the opposite direction on another street at the time of the assassination and had some info as to who may have shot the president. They have not heard back from Mrs. Kennedy to this date. Mrs. Small stated that she was working at the Maywood Manufacturing Company between Dallas and Irving on November 22, 63, and did not get off work until 4:30 that day. She did state that on a morning, November 23, 63, when her husband first saw Oswald's photo in Dallas newspaper, he made the remark that that is the man that I picked up and took to Oak Cliff, or words to that effect. So, what are we to believe about that, folks? I have no idea. No clue. Huh. I don't know why I kept this. Maybe it was for uh maybe it's for comic relief here. So this is an FBI Western Union telegram, and it was to Mr. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI from a Mrs. Edith Furtado in Granada, California. Her Western Union telegram to J. Edgar Hoover stated thus: I would like to know the true circumstances regarding John F. Kennedy's death. Sincerely, Mrs. Edith Furtado, blah, blah, Granada, California. Don't we all, Edith? Don't we all? I wondered if old J. Edgar ever answered a devil. All right, next up, FBI doc from March 27, 67. Mr. Milton Hallmark of Michigan Avenue, Dallas, Texas, reported telephonically to the Dallas FBI office that his mama, Mrs. Ruth Hallmark, who resides with him at the aforementioned address, possessed pertinent information on the above captioned matter. Mr. Hallmark stated that his mama had formerly worked in the building across the street from the school book depository, and he said that in the past he had heard his mama make the statement that she had seen Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby together in the building in which she had been employed on November 21st, 1963. That's the day before the assassination, folks. She stated that she was employed by the Miller Randazzo Company at the old Dowtex building, 501 Elm Street, at the time of the assassination. She stated that she recalled on November 21st that 4 men who were all strangers to her, and none of whom who were employees of the Miller Randazzo Company, came to the third floor offices of this company. She stated that these men were not together, all 4 arriving at different times during the day. Mrs. Hallmark stated that one of these men resembled Lee Harvey Oswald, and another resembled Jack Ruby. The man who resembled Oswald asked one of the employees if he could use the telephone. But then before he'd even had a chance to use it, he just turned around and left the office without saying a word. Mrs. Hallmark stated that she definitely could not say that either of these men were Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby. She stated that the other 2 men did not resemble anybody whom she had ever seen before or since. She described the man who resembled Oswald as a white male, approximately 30, 5'10", slender build, dark hair, dressed in a sports shirt and slacks. She described the man who resembled Jack Ruby as a white man, 5'10" to 5'11", heavy build, brown hair, and dressed in a business suit. Mrs. Hallmark stated she could recall no descriptive data on the other 2 men whom she saw on this day. Now she goes on to say how she noticed the resemblance of these 2 men after they came out on the news and in newspapers. But that's not all. So she stated that on November 22nd, she was looking out the 3rd floor window of her office to watch the motorcade pass by. And she heard 3 shots, and she stated she immediately knew that these were gunshots and not backfires. And on hearing the first shot, she stated she looked up towards the school book depository and saw smoke in the area of one of the upper floors of this building. She stated she saw no persons inside the building in the area of the smoke. Mrs. Hallmark added that the window she was looking out of faced Elm Street, and that it was necessary for her to push all the way through to her giant booty very far out the window to see exactly what she did. She said after the first gunshot, there was a lapse of time, and then there were 2 additional shots, one right after the other. She knew President Kennedy had been hit by one of the bullets as she saw blood, and she also saw Governor Connally slump over into the seat of the automobile. Mrs. Hallmark stated that she saw, or that the smoke she saw in the area of the Texas School Book Depository was right next to that building, and was at least 1 floor higher than the floor on which she was standing. She was on the 3rd floor of the old John Deere building and estimated that smoke she saw came from the 4th, 5th, or 6th floor of that Texas School Book Depository building. And it was at this point that Mrs. Hallmark's son, Milton, came into the room and interrupted to tell the interviewing agent that approximately 3 to 4 evenings ago, he telephoned District Attorney Jim Garrison and let him know that his mama had seen all this stuff and they were awaiting a call back from Jim Garrison. Now, Mrs. Hallmark stated that one of her friends, a Thelma Maricow, worked with her at the time, and they had talked about this stuff at the time. Talked about the strangers, talked about them looking like Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby. So the FBI went and interviewed Mrs. Maricow, and she stated that she did not recall seeing any strange men on the third floor of the Miller Randazzo building or company on November 21st, 63. She said she did not know anyone who looked like either Oswald or Ruby, and stated she had never discussed any such matter with Mrs. Hallmark. She stated that Mrs. Hallmark was a co-worker of hers and merely an acquaintance, but not close friends. It was Mrs. Maricow's opinion that Hallmark is mistaken as to the fact that she discussed anything regarding the assassination with her. Mrs. Maricow added that she did not know of any employees of the Miller Randazzo Company who had discussed noting any resemblance of the two strange men to Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby. So, did Milton's mommy see anything that day, or is she full of shit, folks? I don't know. Milton! Milton! Get in here and bring my dentures, boy. And a cup of tea. Hot tea. Earl Grey, you son of a bitch. Better not be no chamomile. Milton! On January 15th, 1964, J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, sent out an airtel to the special agent in charge of the Dallas division of the FBI because he thought they might have a potential problem. Relating to the alleged observations of Richard Randolph Carr. The purpose of submitting a letterhead memorandum in this matter is not clear. It would appear this inquiry should be handled as a regular investigative development under the above caption and not under the caption of the reference to Airtel. Prior to considering this matter resolved, the allegations made by Carr should be specifically repudiated. It is noted one of the original allegations is that Carr stated that Oswald did not assassinate the president and that he and 4 or 5 of the other steelworkers witnessed the assassination and presumably they could substantiate Carr's statements. Carr should be recontacted and an appropriate signed statement taken regarding his observations. He should be confronted with the inconsistencies noted, particularly those based on personal observation by Dallas agents. You should also be alert to any violation of Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 1001. So, if Richard Randolph Carr is telling the truth, apparently J. Edgar Hoover said, nah. We can't have that guy saying what he's saying. All right, next up, Mr. Hank the Tank Farmer. In care of Mrs. Dorothy Martin, above address, advised he is a service station attendant at the Brock Station on Singleton Street in Dallas, Texas. Now, this is an FBI memorandum dated December the 14th, 63. Okay, Mr. Hank the Tank Farmer advised that on the 22nd of November 63 at approximately 12:15, he arrived at the Dallas County Courthouse to pay his damn taxes. He was unaware that there was to be a presidential motorcade passing by at this time. He noticed the crowd and heard someone say that the president is coming. No, it wasn't Marilyn Monroe. He waited in the park at the corner of Houston and Elm Street and watched the motorcade come west off Main Street onto Houston Street and then west on Elm. He stated he saw Kennedy appear to fall over in the car, and then he saw Governor Connally also appear to fall over. He did not hear any shots fired and did not know what happened, and there was confusion with many people running in all directions, and then the president's car drove off at a high rate of speed. Farmer stated that he did not know what happened, but thought that both men had been shot However, he did not hear any shots. He stated he has no further information to furnish on the shooting, so he then returned home. He does not know Lee Harvey Oswald and has never seen him other than on television. He also does not know Jack Ruby and only saw him on television. So, thanks, Hank the Tank. Very astute observations. But apparently, Hank the Tank was a busy man, shall we say. Now, this memorandum is dated 11/23/63, which is the day after the assassination. It states this: at 8:51 a.m., 11/23/63, Mrs. Dorothy Martin, right? Remember, we just read about Mr. Hank Farmer, who is in the care of Mrs. Dorothy Martin at the above address of Toronto Street, which is Mrs. Dorothy Martin's address. So that means Mr. Hank the Tank Farmer is staying with Dorothy Martin. So, advised that on the night of 11/22/63, Mr. Hank the Tank Farmer was interviewed by the FBI and gave her address. She called to state that he had given this address merely because he did not have another residential address to give. When questioned more closely, she advised that she was not supposed to have anybody living with her at the Dallas Housing Authority project, and as a consequence, did not want her address used for fear of newspaper publicity. The aforementioned is for information. So, she had Hank the Tank Farmer staying with her. Apparently, he was installing some pipe in Mrs. Martin's residence. Wiggling back to November 22nd, 63, for the original statement of Hank the Tank. Today at 5:36 p.m., Hank the Tank Farmer, 2862 Toronto Street, telephonically advised the Dallas FBI office that he advised that he was standing on the southeast corner of Elm and Houston at the time when the President Kennedy was shot. He stated he saw Kennedy hit by the bullet and felt that the bullet entered Kennedy's face. He stated he then saw Governor Connally shot, and this shot entered Connally's back. Farmer stated, therefore, it is his opinion that the two shots were fired by two individuals from opposite directions, and Farmer stated he wishes to speak to an agent while or within the Bureau and states he will not talk to the Dallas PD because he hates them some bitches. Well, Hank the Tank, that's probably why y'all have never heard of him before, because he states that the shots came from different directions. Imagine that. Hank the Tank, baby. Hank the Tank. Next up, from the FBI office in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Yeah, that's right. You heard me right. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, November 26, 1963. On the evening of November 22nd, a Mr. Charles J. Shanker of Norman, Oklahoma, a bank examiner employed by the Treasury Department, telephonically advised that he was in Dallas, Texas on Wednesday, November 20th, and on the evening of that date, at a parking lot of the Adolphus Hotel in downtown Dallas, a parking attendant there told him he knew some guy who was going to kill the president and Governor Connally. The parking attendant said this person had been to Russia. No further description of this was given. On November 23rd, 63, Mr. Shanker was interviewed and furnished the following signed statement. I, Charles J. Shanker, make the following voluntary statement to Donald Sloat and Harold Duncan, who have identified themselves to me as special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the U.S. Department of Justice. I know the information I furnish may be used in a court of law. I am 28 years of age and I reside at 817 East Lindsay, Norman, Oklahoma. I am employed as a bank examiner by the Treasury Department. On Wednesday, November 20th, 63, I was at Dallas, Texas in the company of other bank examiners auditing the First National Bank of Dallas, Texas. On that evening, a friend and I attended a show at the Theater Lounge in Dallas, Texas. The theater lounge is located near the Adolphus Hotel. I sat through 3 shows at the theater lounge, and late in the evening, I felt ill as a result of several drinks I had. I left my friend in the lounge and went to a restroom, then believing that fresh air would help me, so I went outside. I intended to wait for my friend at the car and return to our quarters at the Four Winds Motel on Harry Hines Boulevard in Dallas. The car was parked in the basement of the Adolphus Hotel. I waited there a short while, and still feeling ill, I inquired of a parking attendant for the location of a restroom. I went to the restroom, and the attendant followed me in there, and then offered to hold it for me. In the restroom, the attendant engaged me in conversation, first commenting on the expected arrival of President John F. Kennedy. He then said that there was a plot to kill the president and Governor Connally. When I expressed disbelief at this statement, he continued by stating that he knew the person who was planning the act. To my knowledge, the conversation with the attendant began with this remark: "You look like an intelligent fellow. If I tell you something, will you believe it?" When I replied that I did not know whether I would believe it or not, he said that President Kennedy was coming to Dallas and that he and the governor would be shot down. The attendant's words were, quote, "They're going to be shot down," end quote. I told the attendant that I thought he was crazy, and he replied that he knew the cat who was going to do it, and that this person did not like the way the president was running the country. I then said to the attendant that if this person did not like it here, he should leave. He then said he has been to Russia and to Cuba and was not allowed to stay there. I then asked the parking attendant to write down what he had just told me or go to the police with me. He refused to do either one, claiming that he could not write. He refused to name the person involved in the above information. Seeing a stranger approaching, I asked the parking attendant to relate the same information to him, but he refused to say anything, saying, "No, man, I didn't say anything about that." I had said to the stranger that the parking attendant had information to the effect that Kennedy was going to be assassinated. After the parking attendant denied this information to the stranger, the stranger, suggested I go home and sleep it off and forget the matter. After the stranger left, I inquired of the parking attendant that if he knew this information, how did he know, and how was he associated with the information and the person who was to commit the act. The parking attendant then refused to tell me how he knew. I then left the parking garage and went to the Four Winds Motel by taxi. I did not recall the above information until Friday, November 22nd, 1963, when Kennedy was killed. Upon hearing the news report of his death, the incident was recalled. I have read the above statement consisting of this and 4 other pages, and the information contained therein is the truth, best to my knowledge and recollection. Sincerely, Charles J. Shanker. Sounds like a legit guy, a bank examiner, an auditor, working for the Treasury Department. He might have been a little shit-faced drunk, but things happen. Things happen, folks. So, they found at the Adolphus Hotel garage at Dallas, Texas, established that Ernest Rogers was the only employee with a scar on his neck as described by Charles Shanker. Ernest Rogers, 3785 Pointer Street, Dallas, Texas, a parking lot attendant at the Adolphus Hotel, advised that on November 23rd, 1963, or advised on the 23rd, that on the 20th, he worked his regular shift at the Adolphus parking lot, namely 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and that after working, he proceeded directly to his residence at the above address. Rogers stated that he had never engaged in any conversation with anybody at any time concerning the possible assassination of President Kennedy. He denied having a conversation with Charles Shanker and said he had never heard any talk by others concerning the assassination of the president prior to the actual event. "I don't know nothing about nobody, nothing," On November 25th, Shanker was exhibited a photograph of Ernest Rogers, a Negro male born April 30th, 1936 in Marietta, Texas. Shanker stated he believed that Ernest was the person with whom he had a conversation on the late evening of November 20th. He recalled the person with whom he talked as being heavier and with a definite scar on his neck or throat and a mustache. Mr. Shanker stated he had started drinking beer at about 5 or 5:30 on November 20th, and he had 10 to 12 beers during the evening until approximately midnight, and that he was drunk when the incident with the parking attendant took place. He said he had nothing to drink but beer during the evening. So who's telling the truth there? Old Treasury Department Shanker or Brother Ernest? We'll never know. The world will never know. Now, this one here is interesting, folks. Pay attention. January the 9th, 1964. To the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, from Special Agent in Charge, Dallas. Subject, Lee Harvey Oswald. Regarding a telephone call from Inspector James Malley to J. Gordon Shanklin, Dallas. Assistant Chief of Police Charles Batchelor, Dallas PD, this date, advised Vincent Drain that Inspector Sawyer of the Dallas PD was one of the first officers to arrive at the scene of the schoolbook depository building at 411 Elm Street. An unidentified individual told Inspector Sawyer that he had seen an individual run from the TSBD building shortly after the shooting of President Kennedy, and that this individual was an unknown white male, approximately 30, slender build, 5'9" or 5'10", 165 pounds, carrying what looked to be a 30-06 or some type of Winchester rifle. Inspector Sawyer then contacted Dallas Police Sergeant G.D. Hensley, a radio dispatcher, and this description was broadcast to all Dallas Police squad cars. Sawyer did not get the individual's name who furnished the information, of course. Why would he? And from affidavits taken subsequently of individuals who were near the scene at the time of the shooting, no identification has been made of the source of this information. Interesting. And here's another one from previously Unheard by Me files. This comes from Tom Leatherberry, who is the president of the Wilbert Vault Company of Texas. Now, this vault company did not make safes. Well, they kind of did, but they were for dead bodies, in which coffins or caskets were placed in them and buried. I'm talking about burial vaults, people. So this comes from the Wilbert Vault Company of Texas. The president of that company being Tom Leatherberry. This letter is dated November 26, 1963. To the agent in charge, FBI, Dallas, Texas, dear sir, I herewith present my statement of a happening which may or may not be important to your investigation of the tragic slaying of President Kennedy. I will do my best to make it brief. On Friday, November 22nd, 63, at 4:50 p.m., I was standing on the grass esplanade near the spot where President Kennedy was shot earlier in the day. There were a number of people going and coming with very little or no conversation. Most everyone seemed stunned over the assassination. There was, however, one young man there who was full of good humor and a wealth of information. He overheard me quietly ask another bystander whether the motorcade had come straight out Elm or had turned left off Houston. He immediately attached himself to me, all the while answering questions even before they entered my mind. He had many theories regarding the shooting, and at first I considered him to be just an alert, friendly young man. However, in only a few minutes his conversation left me uncomfortable, and as I realized later, even suspicious. Among other unsolicited information, he theorized why the killer had waited until the car had turned off Houston before firing his shots. He talked much and showed me where a bullet was supposed to have been dug out of the ground at the corner of a concrete square at the curbside of the esplanade, and as I took a Polaroid picture of the spot, he noticed me lining it up with the window of the building where the shots were supposed to have come from. I'm a former U.S. Marine and was doing this really without thinking about it, and he started talking about the trajectory of the bullets and said, I have a feeling that they had stood right here where we are standing now and lined up the shooting beforehand. He went into a long discourse of how easy it would be to figure out the shot by finding out the height of the president, the height of the car seat, and all of this. This boy told me he had watched the motorcade from the Southland building, and it bothered me that he was speculating as to why the president had stood up in the car after it turned left off Houston and seconds before he was shot. I still have not heard or read that. This young man appeared to be about 22 to 25, slim, 130 pounds, possibly 5'10". He had light hair, may have been dyed and curled, and his right eye had a puffy look to it. He wore a light-colored tweed suit with a small white flower in the lapel. He had neither a prosperous nor a poor appearance. Later Friday evening, I told my wife that the more I thought about it, the more I believed that I should tell someone about this fellow. I first went to the Southland Hotel and talked to the doorman, and the hotel officer learned that the boy I described to them had been in the lobby 7 hours before with a bald-headed man who was, quote, popping off about the president and his death. They said they had never seen him before. I then went to the sheriff's department and told them the same thing as we have written here, and was told the Southland is a long ways from here, and besides, it was a one-man job, and anyway, the investigation has been transferred to the city, and if you want to, you can go tell them about it. I then went to the city municipal building and told the same story to a detective who was as unimpressed as the man had been in the sheriff's office. He did take my name and room number at the Holiday Inn, but assured me that it was just a one-man show and that they have the man in custody. Saturday night, I talked to the doorman at the Southland Hotel again, and he said that he had seen that boy again and found out he was in the hotel, and he was a trainee of some sort with the Commonwealth life insurance company upstairs. He said that as far as he knew, the police had not been around to check on him. I have just read in the Monday Galveston Tribune that you have a Dallas map found in Harvey Oswald's rooming house, and at the intersection of Houston and Elm Streets, a line traces the trajectory similar to that of the shot which took the life of the president. The person I have described may turn out to be just an extrovert with a great deal of perception and imagination. However, I know that you people are better able to decide than anyone else. I live at 4711 Sherman, Galveston, Texas. Telephone, Tom Leatherberry, president of the Wilbert Vault Company of Texas, Houston. November 27th, 1963, FBI memorandum. Mrs. Billy Morse of 2534 West 5th Street, Irving, Texas, furnished the following information. Now, for those of you paying attention at home, Mrs. Billy Morse was part of the Cackling Hen crew, sat around while their husbands were at work in Irving, Texas, and drank tea and gossiped about all the bitches along with Ruth Payne, Marina Oswald, Lenny Mae Randall, and so forth and so on. During the afternoon of October 27, 1963, she was visiting her cousin, Mrs. Allen Lewis, who was, again, part of the Cackling Hen crew, and she lived at 2514 West Fifth Street in Irving at 5:30 or 6. She recalls seeing a man sitting in a lawn chair across the street with his hog out at 2515 West Fifth Street. No, he didn't have his hog out, folks. In fact, his nickname was Pinky. No, I'm sorry. We're not there yet. Sorry. He was alone, except for several small children playing in the yard. She recalled that this man resembled the photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald, but is not sure that he was the same man. Upon viewing a photograph of Jack Ruby, that's right, Pinky, as he was known, she stated that she is not certain that she's seen this man, but believes he may have been in Irving sometime in the summer of 63 when a man resembling his photograph came next door to her house and picked up her neighbor, Bill Simmons, who was playing in a combo in one of Ruby's nightclubs. This man may have been Ruby. She is certain, however, that she has never seen Ruby and Oswald together. Interesting. And that is true. Bill Simmons, who worked at the Carousel Club, I believe as a drummer, lived right across the street from Ruth Payne in Irving. Hear that? All right. January 10th, 67. William Blanton Acker of Auburn, Alabama, advised that he had just finished reading an article regarding the assassination of President Kennedy in the January 14th issue of the Saturday Evening Post and wished to furnish the following information. In 1963, he was in Miami, Florida, employed at the Royal Castle, No. 2, Flagler and 2nd, and met one Art Silva. Silva at that time was living with one Phyllis, last name unknown, at a small hotel across the street from Royal Castle No. 2. They later moved to an apartment in a court near Lejeune Road and 8th Street, which was behind a fruit stand. One of their neighbors in the court, consisting of about 10 units, was one Roy, last name unknown, who was living with some woman, name unrecalled, in the court next door to Art's. Roy, Hargraves, by the way, according to Art, had several telescopic sight rifles, grenades, mortars, dynamite, etc. in his room. Also, Roy had made a trip to Dallas, Texas in late November of 63 and was reported by Art to have Secret Service credentials. Roy was also associated with various Cuban resistance movements and was an ex-Marine. Acker notes that instant article he read says a policeman stopped a man in Dallas who showed Secret Service credentials. Acker says at a Christmas party in 63 he was arguing with Roy and almost came to blows as Roy blamed former President Kennedy personally for the death of one of his close friends who was in the invasion at the Bay of Pigs. That, folks, is what you call very, very interesting. Roy Hargraves, people. And this is from HSCA, November 7th, 78, an outside contact report with Linda Pites of Odessa, Texas. Interview. Reached at her father's home in Dallas, Texas, she recalled the following details during our conversation on the phone. Distinctly heard 3 shots, saw the president's head blow up like a watermelon. The latter remains vivid in her mind. While unable to determine the direction of the shots, she still has the impression the head trauma was the result of a front-to-rear shot. Advised further, she and her sister Rosemary were close to the curb, perhaps 10 to 15 feet, in order to get a good look at JFK. This had been considered to be quite the occasion. They were even excused from school to do so. After all, presidents didn't come to Dallas that often. Although they were close together, she didn't come into full view as Rosemary did. And finally, she remembers the gunfire being rapid. No further details regarding the timing. George Davis, 1966, December 9th. This is an interview by Hollis McCombs. After the president had been hit, you were telling me, Davis says, and this is George A. Davis, by the way. I definitely saw the car stop just a little bit west of the steps leading down to the street, the westernmost steps, possibly 100 feet from me. I saw Mrs. Kennedy on the back seat. McCombs, do you remember what Mr. and Mrs. Connolly were doing? Davis, no. There was a commotion in the car, but mostly my eyes were glued on the president. So the man came up with a trench coat on with an automatic pistol on the north side of the car near the rear of the car. McCombs, do you remember what anybody else did? Davis, no. One policeman laid his motorcycle down in the street, and another one ran up the embankment on a motorcycle. McCombs, do you remember what he did? No. McCombs, you were telling me about the skull yesterday. Davis, we went around the corner of the fence where they said the smoke came from and just followed the crowd around. McCombs, someone said it was just jammed with cars, a brown station wagon with prints on it. Hey, didn't we talk about a brown station wagon earlier? Davis, I didn't hear anybody make a remark about anything like that. Mr. Bowers would have seen a man with a gun of any kind standing there. He said there was no human being on Earth, or I'm sorry, there was no human being up on the north side of the fence. I think that pretty well clears that up. McCombs, I think it does. While Shelley Katz and Mr. Davis and I were standing over the underpass, there was a sound like a rifle shot, a backfire or something. I immediately turned to Shelley Katz and said, how many did you hear? He said 3. I asked Mr. Davis, how many did you hear? Mr. Davis said he heard 3. So then we all agreed that there was only one shot, but we heard 2 echoes, all 3 of us. Now, let's see. It seemed to you these cars were traveling at about 18 to 20 miles an hour. Davis, the scene is the same now as then, except the trees and shrubbery around the fence are bigger. Combs, Mrs. Davis said he saw the blood spurt right out and down the shirt. Now, after you came from behind the fence, a uniformed officer, Davis, he came around the fence and said to me, look at this piece of skull bone I just picked up from the center of the street. And he handed it to me, and it was perfectly clear of blood, and I would say it was close to 2 inches long and about 3/4 of an inch wide on one end, and maybe 1 1/4 inches on the other. But on one side of it, you could definitely tell that it had cradled the brain. You know how the inside of the skull is. It's a little cluster of little dark red circles. He handed it to me, and I handed it back to him after I looked it over, and there was a plainclothesman who said, here, I'll take that, and he reached out and took it out of the policeman's hand. I don't know who he was. The policeman may have known him, but I didn't. He was a heavy-set man, well-dressed as I remember it. He had something on like a trench coat. He put it in his pocket. He left, and I didn't watch where he went with it. McCombs, were people talking and jabbering around you by this time? Davis, there was quite a bit of excitement. People were in a real state of shock. Didn't seem to say much. Not much said. McCombs, do you remember anything that was said by anyone? Davis, no, but I do know that Mr. Bowers, possibly under the instructions and orders from the police, stopped all trains. No trains came in or left during that time. I think a policeman searched one train before it was left to see that there was no one leaving on the trains or anything like that. I do know they held up train traffic there for quite a while. Davis, talked with him yesterday. afternoon regarding any statement that Mr. Bowers may have made to him. Mr. Bowers did not tell him directly that he didn't see anyone on the north side of the fence, but he did hear Mr. Bowers say it talking to other people. There is the tower, but not to him. Coombs, how long did smoke hang there? Was it still there till you ran around the fence? Davis, no, it was gone in, I'd say, a minute, minute and a half at most. And then there was nothing there. Smoke was bluish, whitish smoke, and I examined the ground and looked around and saw no sign of spent cartridges there when went on the north side of the fence. McCombs, so you saw no ejected shells? Davis, no. When you McCombs, when y'all got around there, nobody was there in the corner. Davis, no, sir. McCombs, did you have any notion where the bullets were coming from? Davis, no. As I told you, from where I was standing, there was a tree limb that blocked my view of the window where Oswald allegedly did the shootings from. Otherwise, I believe I would have seen it because I've hunted squirrels and things enough in the woods that if anything moves, I'll see it. If a tiny baby roach crawls anywhere in the house, I'll see that thing. I don't know what, but anything moving attracts my eye. I think that's the reason I didn't see Oswald. Coombs, did you have any idea where the bullets were coming from? Did you assume where they were coming from? Davis, I never thought about that. Sounded like a cluster of medium-sized firecrackers. There were probably 8 or 9 concussions, explosions, whatever you want to call it. One shot, 2 or 3 echoes, another shot, 2 or 3 more echoes, another shot, 2 or 3 more echoes. Like we heard yesterday, and I don't think anyone standing on the overpass could have counted the shots. I have heard other men make the same statement. I think Luke Winborn is one of them. Davis, quote, positive proof Oswald is the only gunman. Bethune. P.S. Shelley Katz took pictures of Mr. Davis dressed as he was on that day of the assassination, standing in the same position he was on the day of the assassination and looking in the same direction. Also, Katz took furious close-up pictures and character study pictures and placement pictures. Katz has already sent them on to Ed Kern in New York. Davis, home number is blank. 1443 North Beckley, Dallas, Texas. Close to the rooming house. And our last one for the day, folks, is from December 27, 1963, from Special Agent Harlan Brown. At 3:20 p.m. on December 27, 1963, Mrs. Mary Sue Brown of Singing Hills Boulevard, Dallas, Texas, requested that her identity be kept confidential. Stated that about 3 weeks ago, an individual named Richard Carr, who resides on North Bishop Street in Dallas, had told her that Lee Harvey Oswald had not assassinated President Kennedy. Carr is a friend of Mrs. Brown's sister, Elsie Johnson, who resides at the same address as Mrs. Brown. A friend named Holly Jordan also heard this individual make the statement concerning the fact that Oswald did not assassinate the president. According to Mrs. Brown, Carr was making an application for a job at a building which was under construction near the courthouse at the time President Kennedy was assassinated. Carr told her and the others that he was about 500 yards from the place where the president was assassinated, and that he had seen the individual who had fired the gun from the school book depository, and that it was not Oswald. Now, this is from 500 yards away, folks. You know how many football fields that is? 5 football fields laid end to end. But this guy was sure that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald, who probably looked like an ant at that time. He said that this individual had on a hat, horn-rimmed glasses, and was of athletic build. Carr told him that there was a Negro man with a gray-colored car waiting for this individual after the assassination, and that the man who did the shooting got into this gray car. Clara told Mrs. Brown and the others that there were 4 or 5 other steel workers on the building under construction near the place where the president was assassinated, and that they could likewise corroborate his story. Carr said that one of them had been interviewed already by the FBI. Mrs. Brown believed that the building Carr had reference to was a county building being constructed south of the old courthouse. Said that Carr was sober at the time that he made the statement, and although she did not know him well, he didn't seem to be the braggart type or to be joking when he told this story. She said that Carr is currently working on the new First National Bank building in downtown Dallas, which is currently under construction. So, very interesting stuff, folks. That's going to be all we get into this week, but I think that's enough for 1 week anyway.
President Kennedy died
so like I say, follow me on all the socials at the Lone Gunman 7. Feel free to leave a review for this show wherever you listen to it at. Be much greatly appreciated. Again, thank you all for following along and listening. We are almost to the 60th anniversary of the death of the president, and it's about time we solve this thing up right. And the only way we're going to do it is together. So, help your boy put the pieces together. Head to YouTube, make sure to subscribe, and hit the bell to get notified every time a new episode drops. Once again, that's it for your boy, the Triple B, Big Bad Bob. Out.
Big event that you